the amount of concessions that we're seeing is a lot. And the return on those concessions is very, very high. Meaning, if the regular rate is 6.5% and we get, $10, $15, $20,000 from sellers, those rates tumble in a huge hurry down into the, low to mid fives sometime. We're closing a lot of loans right now with rates that start with a 5.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mortgage Minute with Brian Dewald and Matt Thomas. Our big question of the day today is the Fed backing off of their anticipated rate reduction that they were talking about in September? We will also be discussing how rates have recently been hanging out in the 6s, which is great news, nowhere near where they were a month ago. And lastly, we are still seeing seller concessions for buydowns, which get a lot of folks into the 5s. Brian, let's start with the first question. Is the Fed backing off their anticipated rate reduction in September?
Yeah, it's a great question. It appears so, right? We were seeing reports where, guesstimates were thinking anywhere between 50 and 75 basis points of a reduction. So 0.5 point to 0.75 of a point reduction. And I think they didn't really commit to that, but they sort of hinted to it a little bit. And I think they're going to back off from that. I think we'll probably see a 0.25% reduction, which is still welcome news. But we've come off some of the highs for where we were anticipating rates to drop.
Now, there's been some implication that anticipated 0.25% drop is already sort of baked into current rates, because typically mortgage rates, while they're not directly related to the Fed rate, they are reflective of the news and the anticipation. And so, in your opinion, do you think that anticipation of a rate reduction, of a smaller rate reduction like the 0.25, do you think that is already baked into what we're seeing in terms of our rates currently?
I do. Yeah. I think what kind of the Fed is determining how low to drop rates is based on all sorts of economic data that's coming out prior to that. So for instance, here we are on August 20th, 2024. Last week, there was a little bit of bumpiness in terms of, 2 major reports that we saw that were a little better in previous months. So the CPI came in a little higher than what the mortgage market was thinking. And the big one for the Fed was the jobs report, right? Just jobs and jobless claims and all this kind of stuff. There's another big jobs report coming out in September before the meeting, and we'll have 4 or 5 more jobless claims reports between now and then. But those are the kind of things that the Fed is looking at when they're determining how much to drop. And of course, we see that every day too. So yes is the short answer. We do already have that baked in and anticipated. And then between now and then, and even in days prior, we see all of this data that helps move mortgage rates up or down every single day.
When is the Fed meeting next?
I'd have to look. I think it's mid to late September.
Yeah. So if they come out and they actually say we are looking at making a rate reduction, do you think we'll see a move in the mortgage market at that point? Given
100%.
The fact that
and I think it'll happen even before the meeting, because all of the data that lowers the Fed rate we'll already know about. So that's already going to be talked about and looked at and factored in.
So essentially, if people are watching the numbers like the Fed is watching the numbers, now everyone is going to have their own opinion on what those numbers are going to do. But, like the jobless claims and things that are reported several times between now and then, if those come out and are indicating one thing or another, it's possible that rates would move ahead of schedule, right?
100% accurate. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. We're seeing rates now in the 6s, and they have been in the 6s for a while. I know, again, while we don't like to report specific numbers because what everyone qualifies from a rate standpoint is different based on your own personal financial situation. But generally speaking, I've seen rates hovering right around the 6.5 mark, which is pretty fantastic. I mean, that's a full 1.5 off of what we saw back in October of last year, right? When it hit that absolute high mark.
That was close to 8%, even a scratch higher for a few days. Yeah. So, and even over the last, 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks, there's been some little improvements, not shocking developments in terms of, a huge rate reduction, but we have started to see, generally speaking, lower rates. So that's been great.
What would you say that equates to in terms of, an average mortgage? I saw a statistic where, there was basically a mortgage that was, I think, in the 7s was actually, probably like a $2,400 mortgage, whereas now it would be a $2,000 mortgage.
Yeah.
Payment.
Let's do a quick. So my average loan amount is right around $500,000. So if we say 7.5% on a $500,000 loan, that principal and interest by itself is $3,496. If we are to say 6.5 down from 7.5, this is depending on a bunch of stuff, then we're at 3,160. So it's a $300+ a month, drop in payment. So there's two ways to look at it, right? Either the same house and the payment goes down, and a lot of folks are in this mindset where now instead of affording a 600 house or whatever the number is, now we're looking at a 650 house or whatever. So kind of cool to be able to see some of that. And then we were going to touch on this. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one thing we're seeing a lot of right now are concessions still from sellers, right? And the amount of concessions that we're seeing is a lot. And the return on those concessions is very, very high. Meaning, if the regular rate is 6.5% and we get, $10, $15, $20,000 from sellers, those rates tumble in a huge hurry down into the, low to mid fives sometimes. So
low to mid fives. Wow.
Yeah. And again, everything is specific to the, the loan type and things like that and how much we get for concessions and qualifying and what's going on today kind of a thing. But we're closing a lot of loans right now with rates that start with a 5.
No, that's awesome. And are we talking about temporary buydowns? Or are we talking about permanent buydowns?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've sort of lost my infatuation with temporary rate buydowns.
Yeah.
They were really, really great when they first, kind of started. Now a lot of them are coming due and people are starting to get a little nervous. Just spoke to a young lady at church the other day about this, in fact, where she's like, I've only got until November. You think it's going to get better? I'm like, I don't know. So we'll just have to play it by ear. But if we look at like absolute worst case scenario, if rates never get better and we end up with a rate at 5.5 or 5.75, like that's pretty good compared to where we were, recently. So it's making a nice difference. The other thing that's key there is that the cost of the whole separate conversation and lesson, but the cost of doing the buy down itself has increased just from a standpoint of what's called loan level price adjustments. So anyway, we don't have time to go into all that, but the cost has gone up on them. So I have been doing a lot more just permanent buy downs.
That's fantastic. So you're seeing, I'm seeing this as well. I'm seeing very typically $10,000 as a minimum if somebody's asking and getting a buy down.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's where it starts, I think, to probably matter. If maybe I'm wrong on that, but you need about $10,000 from a seller to have that start to really matter. But then, it's not uncommon to see $15,000 of concessions. I think that's probably the most common number that I'm seeing.
I know.
The 10 or the 15 are obviously in between. But then, you're seeing sometimes as high as 20 or 25 on occasion.
Yep. Yeah. And it's insane. Even 15K buys your rate down so far, and it's at no expense to the buyer, but and we can set this up on a separate call maybe to show what the actual math is, but it's a dramatic difference getting that concession than it is to lower the price, say 10 grand. In other words, if we just use that 10 grand to buy the rate down instead of lowering it from 590 to 580, that doesn't do much for your payment, but to drop the rate, it's a substantial difference in payment.
I'll put a link up here so that people can go see that where we've done that in the past.
Okay.
We can shoot a video again with newer numbers and things like that, just to refresh it. But I would say, I'm going to encourage people just to reach out. As always, we are, really trying to make sure that you can always reach out to Brian or myself without any obligation and ask questions and run numbers and look at what scenarios might play out. Because honestly, Brian, I know you're always willing to be able to run 100%. Numbers with people and help them understand what, mortgages can be confusing, especially now with everyone, thinking that they're so high or they are high relative to, the 2s and 3s and 4% that people have been used to over the past several years. But realizing that, they're not in the 8s anymore, they're not in the 7s anymore. And if you can do a buy down into the 5s potentially, you might be shocked to see that, that things are more affordable, at least than you thought they were. If you can get a permanent buy down rather than that temporary buy down into the 5s, that is historically a phenomenal number.
Agree.
Well, again, we encourage you to always reach out.
Love it.
Until then, we'll talk to you later, Brian.
Thanks so much.